It's a real pleasure to introduce all of you to Howard Mortman. Howard wrote a wonderful book about an interesting role that American rabbis have had, which is offering the opening blessings in the House and Senate chamber in Washington. And I actually had the honor and the privilege of doing this about 14 years ago. And never dreamt that I would think about it much after that. And then about, 3 years ago, when the book was published, popped it open, and there I am in black and white. Howard's made me famous. So it's a pleasure to welcome him and to talk about this. Howard, let me turn it to you. Howard, just so you get a little background about Howard. Howard works at C-SPAN, and so he has very much spent his career and his life in Washington. That means, for those keeping track, he has the politics bug and has not gotten the vaccination yet.
That's very good. Thank you. Well, thank you. Should I just go ahead and get started, Rabbi?
Sure.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
This is, by the way, before I really get started, this is great. And Rabbi Fellman, thank you, and Danny, thank you for allowing me to participate in this with you. And well, yes, as Rabbi Fellman said, he is part of the story. This is not this is my book, but it's not my story. This is the story of the hundreds of rabbis who have prayed in Congress since 1860. So what I want to do, and actually, there's two people before I get in, I want to recognize. Thank you, Rabbi Fellman, for recognizing Rabbi Arnold Resnikoff, and I'll explain why in a moment. He has participated in some of these events with me. Actually, all of these remote events I've done since the book came out, and it's very he's a huge part of the story as well. And we'll talk with him later on. And also, I'm really happy to see. I saw going by the Booth family. If I see them here, I don't see them right now, but they were on. With there he is. Yeah, Cindy Booth. There. Thank you. Cindy, thank you. Cindy Booth is with the synagogue that I went to as a. He's still there. When I went to as a kid, Temple Micah in Washington D.C., where I had my bar mitzvah. So thank you to Cindy Booth for joining. And I'm going to be making a similar presentation to Temple Micah in October. My next gig after Pittsburgh. So I'm excited both for today and for then. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show a presentation full of video and slides. And it lasts probably about 20 or 25 minutes. Then Rabbi Fellman, I'll go back to you, and I would love for you to reflect and be rabbinical and give us your thoughts on what you just saw in your personal experience. Maybe Rabbi Resnikoff can clean up any messes I've made or offer any corrections, and then we can get into a Q&A. So I'm just going to dive right in. And Danny, I'm going to share screen now, and then I will, let me tell, Danny, do you see
We can see you. Right.
Yeah. As
Okay,
soon as
cool.
you put it in presenter mode, we should be good.
All right, give me a second to go into slideshow. And are we thumbs up, Danny, in slideshow here?
Perfect. Looks great.
All right, cool. When Rabbis Bless Congress, the Great American Story of Jewish Prayers in Capitol Hill, came out 2 years ago. First of its kind book, talking about not just rabbis praying in Congress, but prayer in Congress in general. And we could talk later on about the thrill and the fear of doing this kind of project. But let me, well, first of all, the big thing, it's Super Bowl Sunday. Thank you for sharing part of your Super Bowl Sunday day, prayer. Rabbi Resnikoff has seen my presentation before, so I want to throw in some new elements today to surprise him and delight him. That was the challenge. So let's just open up with a Super Bowl prayer given by a rabbi praying in Congress. February 1st, 1983, Rabbi Morris Hirschman from the Chicago area, Danny, gave the prayer February 1st, 1983. This was the day after the Washington Redskins won the Super Bowl over Miami Dolphins. And in his prayer in Congress, as we meet in this Super Bowl of governmental activity that impinges on the life of every American, help us realize that when an issue becomes a political football, there could be many fumbles. Penalize not, we pray thee, our country for our offenses, and may our defense ever be honorable and justified. Help us to pass to those who come after us a tradition unsullied and enhanced. So there is your rarely, I have a chance now to have a Super Bowl prayer here. All right, with that out of the way, let's dive into the serious part of this. All right. The first thing Congress does every session is pray. They pray even before they have the Pledge of Allegiance. In the House, they pray before every legislative session and before every pro forma session. Pro forma session is just a fancy way of a very brief, quick House session where they go in and out to keep the trains running. The Senate prays before every legislative session, but this is in the rules. They pray by the chaplain. Both chambers of Congress, the House and the Senate, have official chaplains who open prayer. They have staff. These are government-paid, taxpayer-paid positions. Their role is to provide the daily prayer in Congress and also minister to the members who are maybe struggling with tough votes, who are struggling with tough personal issues. They offer prayers at funerals that are held in the rotunda and other occasions, but primarily we see them on the floor of the House and the floor of the Senate. I am going to show you an example. There's nothing Jewish or rabbi about this, but here is an example of a recent prayer delivered on January 25th, delivered by the current chaplain of the House, Rear Admiral from the Navy, Margaret Brune Kibben. And I'll just let this play quickly here.
Would you pray with me? O Lord God of peace, we pray this day for the peace found only in you, not as the world gives, for that which is found there is fleeting and flawed. Reveal yourself in this world which rages with hostilities, where there are wars and rumors of wars as far-flung as Ukraine is from Taiwan, where violence threatens to be the only answer to discord. Reveal yourself and grant us your peace. Lord, how long? How long will aggressors take it upon themselves to usurp not just the sovereignty of a nation, but basic human rights? Lord, put an end to the senseless shedding of blood, the indiscriminate targeting of innocents. Then may those who have suffered in ways we cannot imagine emerge from the ashes of their shattered lives and be raised up as a testimony to their enduring faith in your redeeming grace. May the religious resolve of the persecuted in Ukraine, the endangered believers in Nigeria, the repressed Uyghurs in Xinjiang, shine as a light in our darkness and show us what it means to believe in the hope of your salvation. Turn our hearts to receive your mercy and transform our lives to reflect your peace. For it is in your sovereign name we pray. Amen.
Okay, I'm going to pause there and explain a couple things that you just saw. This is typical in terms of length, a minute and a half roughly. But what is not typical about this, and I chose this because not only is it recent, about that, but her mention of Ukraine and current events. Chaplains now, Chaplain Kibben in the House, Chaplain Barry Black in the Senate have invoked Ukraine and current events often in their prayers. So sometimes, and we'll get into this in the presentation today, current events and things happen around the world, the language of those occurrences it can be seen in prayers. I'm going to
Would you pray with me?
Go further than that. All right, brief history of prayers in Congress. Congress has been praying from the very beginning. The Continental Congress opened with a prayer. During the Constitutional Convention, Ben Franklin advocated prayers. The Senate elected a chaplain and the House elected a chaplain. Both occurred before the Bill of Rights was even ratified. So the history of chaplains and prayers in the U.S. Congress goes back to the very beginning. There's the first prayer in Congress on the left there, a picture of that. Guest chaplains began in the 1850s, and we're going to talk about why do we have guest chaplains. Guest chaplains serve a couple roles. Guest chaplains, just on a very practical level, and when Rabbi Fellman participated, it may be because the official chaplain isn't there to perform his or her duties, or it's a chance, and this is a broader point here, by bringing in different religions and different chaplains, it is a chance to demonstrate in our country the diversity of faiths and the diversity of religions, that there's no official religion. This is not a Christian country, that there are rabbis who have been guest chaplains. So it's a great way to show this diversity, the non-establishment, as it were, of a Christian religion, Christian nation. Diving now into the Jewish part of this, rabbis. The first rabbi guest chaplain was Morris Raphael, February 1st, 1860. James Buchanan was president. Rabbi Raphael, kind of a big name at the time, well known, and he gave his prayer. It was the eve of the Civil War. So it's interesting, I pulled out a quote here: north and from south and from east and west joyfully repeat the words of thy psalmist, lo, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. You can almost imagine being in the chamber when he's giving this prayer and he's talking about brethren dwelling together in unity. It was just a very few short months later that the Civil War erupted. Let me show you a video of a more recent guest chaplain. We're going to jump in time now to 2009 and see if anybody here recognizes this handsome gentleman here. So let's play this.
Absolutely.
There you go.
Tonight's Senate will come to order. We will be led in prayer by guest Rabbi Daniel Fellman, Anshe Emeth Memorial Temple, New Brunswick, New Jersey.
We arrive this morning filled with thanks to our Creator, who endows each of us with unalienable rights, to our founding leaders, who joined those rights with responsibilities for ourselves and our fellow citizens, to the people of our nation, for entrusting us with awe-inspiring duties, to each other, as we endeavor to maintain civility, striving for dignity and high purpose in conducting the people's business. Today and every day, let us strive to fill this chamber with humanity, humility, and hope, honoring our nation's past while honing our unique yet shared understanding of the future's ever-present call. As we turn to the business of the people, remind us that we have not come into being to hate or to destroy, but rather we have come into being to praise, to labor, and to love. With gratitude in our souls, we turn to the source of all, seeking blessing for ourselves, our families, our endeavors. May we be guided by the light of the Lord, and may we be of the generation who shines that light for all to see. And let us live the words of our first president. May the Father of all mercies scatter light and not darkness in our paths, and make us all in our several vocations useful here, and in his or her own due time and way, everlastingly happy. Amen.
All right, we'll get to Rabbi Fellman's reaction to this at the end, but there are two things that struck me about this that I really liked: his call for civility in the chamber and in Congress, and the mention of the first president. And I honed in on this. I love that there was a shout out to President George Washington in there. And I'll get to that in a second, why that was for just as an observer of these prayers, that was very interesting that he brought him in. I'll have later on a chart of George Washington mentions by rabbis. So I'm going to move on and let's get this going here. And actually, since Rabbi Reznikov has joined us, let's just do an even more prayer. This is the most recent prayer by a rabbi. We're going to go to the House chamber now. Rabbi Reznikov is on the Zoom, but let's play one of his prayers here.
The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, Rabbi Arnold Reznikov, chaplain, U.S. Navy, retired, Washington, D.C.
Almighty God, we pray, reflect, meditate in different ways, but historic, cherished words become shared dreams. Elmer Davis wrote, "This nation shall be the land of the free, only so long as it is the home of the brave. But not all are yet truly free, and many not so brave. Military heroes risk their lives, but many others lack sufficient courage to speak truth to power, to champion truth over position or career. Liberty and justice for all we pledge. Proclaim liberty throughout the land, emblazoned on our bell. As war approached, FDR affirmed freedom from want and freedom from fear as freedoms more like dreams of better times. The land of the free, if the home of the brave. with leaders strong and of good courage, who still can say, I have a dream. Diversity our strength, equality our goal. May we strive for, move toward liberty and justice for us all. And may we say, Amen.
Okay, really quick thoughts on that. There's a lot packed into that. Rabbi Resnikoff opens his prayers with saying, we pray, reflect, and meditate in many different ways. A universal message for those in the chamber who aren't Christian or Jewish, but just kind of appeal for everybody. I'm trying to remember the timing of this. He gave this prayer on August 9th, 2022. There was a veiled reference here to courage, political leaders not having courage. Well, when we get to Rabbi Resnikoff later on, I believe this was during the January 6th hearings when, and I'm not sure this was a connection to testifying or not, but that's kind of what I drew away from this, of people not having the courage to testify. So I may be wrong in that. Rabbi Resnikoff, correct me later on. So let's, I'm going to go to, all right, a couple of numbers. Let's do some quick numbers. How many times have rabbis prayed in Congress? The answer is 638 times a rabbi has opened Congress with a prayer. Between February 1860, that was Rabbi Morris Raphael, who we met earlier, and August 2022, Rabbi Resnikoff, we just saw the video right now. That's 442 rabbis. Now, why are those numbers different? Why is it 638 times a rabbi has prayed, but there are 442 rabbis? Because about 100 or so rabbis have prayed 2 or more times, including Rabbi Resnikoff. So that's why the numbers are different. For me, even though the number of times a rabbi has prayed in Congress is minuscule compared to the overall times a run-of-the-mill traditional Christian non-Jewish minister has prayed, for me, 638 is still a big number, and in my mind, it begs a story of who these rabbis are and what do they say, which is what the book is about. Couple for numbers fans, a couple fun numbers here. 66 rabbis have prayed both in the House and the Senate. There's Rabbi Gary Zola of the American Jewish Archives, the Hebrew Union College at Cincinnati. 14 times rabbis have prayed in the House on the same day over the years. So a couple fun little numbers there. Most prayers by a rabbi guest chaplain. Number 1, joining us on the Zoom today, Rabbi Resnikoff has prayed the most of any rabbi, 19 times. I believe my book is woefully out of date. Danny, I think the book said 17. He has prayed 2 more times since the book came out. So that demands a second printing of this. Rabbi Moshe Feller, a Lubavitcher rabbi from Minnesota, has prayed 10 times. Rabbi Arthur Schneier from New York, 7 times, a Holocaust survivor. Rabbi Joshua Haberman of Washington Hebrew congregation, deceased, prayed 7 times. So that's the leaderboard there. Rabbi Resnikoff remains, well, hopefully Rabbi Fellman will pray 18 more times. It can tie Rabbi Resnikoff. So the money's on Rabbi Fellman for pulling off that feat. Top states. Here we go. New York is number 1, kind of you might expect, but Pennsylvania, a strong second place for rabbis praying in Congress. And to bring, since Rabbi Fellman previously was in a New Jersey congregation, they are 4th place for states praying in Congress. And just so you know, Washington, D.C., I have Rabbi Resnikoff in that category, representing Washington, D.C. and many others. Pittsburgh rabbis praying in Congress. Here you go, the list here. And there's Rabbi Alvin Birkin from Tree of Life when he prayed in the Senate in the Senate 1991. And actually, I should have the full number here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 times a rabbi from Pittsburgh has prayed in Congress, starting in 1963. So I don't, forgive me, I don't know. I know these names from the research. If any of you are familiar with them personally, that's wonderful. But those are the Pittsburgh rabbis. Top synagogues: Washington Hebrew congregation, 24 times a rabbi from Washington Hebrew congregation has prayed in Congress. Number 8, in second place, B'nai Jeshurun. That's where Rabbi Morris Raphael was from in New York City, their first one. And Addis Israel in Washington, D.C. I have the prayer here from Addis Israel is Rabbi Solomon Metz, who gave the prayer in the Senate on June 5th, 1944, the day before D-Day. And he talks about decisive victory and righteous abiding peace. And it's one of these moments, again, you can almost imagine what is going on inside the chamber on the eve of D-Day, and a rabbi is there giving the prayer. And he ends with, he quotes Micah at the end. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. So a rabbi in the Senate the day before leading at the D-Day. I love talking about this. This chart here shows the spread of Orthodox, Reform, and Conservative. It's roughly a third. And I put non-Orthodox Lubavitch rabbis in the Orthodox column. What I like about this is there's nobody telling anybody who should be praying, meaning there's no quotas. There's no one saying we should only have Lubavitch rabbis, Orthodox rabbis, but this naturally and organically completes the set of just, three roughly equal pies. And this just happens naturally. So I just love that, this is not a quota or the government saying which rabbi should be praying in Congress. The first woman rabbi, I love talking about this, Rabbi Sally Priesand. If you know your Jewish history and your the history of female rabbis in America, you know that she was the first ordained rabbi, and she also gave the first prayer by a woman rabbi in Congress in 1973, a year after she was ordained from Hebrew Union College, sponsored by Congresswoman Bella Abzug of New York, a famous feminist advocate from New York, and gave her prayer. Actually, her prayer historically was on the day that they voted to begin impeachment hearings in the Judiciary Committee against Richard Nixon, and she gave the prayer. One thing she doesn't, in her prayer, she doesn't talk about Rabbi Priesand being the first woman. It's just a straightforward prayer. Bella Abzug, though, her sponsor, talks about the pioneering aspect of it. Now, one little quirk of this, the congressional record, which is I have here, gets her name wrong. They misspell it as P-R-E-I-S-A-N-D. I can assure you, if you buy my book, I get the spelling right. It's P-R-I-E-S-A-N-D. So I only came across one other rabbi whose name was misspelled in the congressional record report, Sally Priesand, for suffering that. I'm sorry. And here's the Sally Priesand sponsored by Bella Abzug, and those are her sponsoring remarks in there. And she actually, Rabbi Priesand was very kind. She wrote a review of my book, and she writes here, this is Sally Priesand's writing. When I accepted Abzug's invitation, neither of us could have known what would be happening in Congress that day, referring back to the Nixon impeachment articles going to the House Judiciary Committee. I'd been told that very few members of Congress would be present for the prayer. So when I arrived and saw a lot of people milling around, I was surprised. So it's kind of interesting there. How many women rabbis have prayed? There have been 16 prayers by 14 women. 13 times a female rabbi has prayed in the House, 3 times in the Senate. At the bottom there, bottom right, Rabbi Hannah Spiro, Reconstructionist rabbi from Washington, D.C. Hil Havara is the only female rabbi to pray more than one time. She has prayed 3 times in the House, and let's hear one of them.
The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, Rabbi Hannah Spiro, Hil Havara, Washington, D.C.
Creator of all, at this time when Jews around the world are preparing for Purim, for a time of confronting hate and persecution with courage, pride, and a sense of humor, help us find that laughter and that love for ourselves and one another, even when the world seems to be crashing down around us. When the world is upside down, teach us how to cartwheel, audaciously adapting and returning, rooted, always back to who we truly are. May our bold open-heartedness bring forth a world of peace, of righteousness, and of jubilation for our families, for our communities, for our nation, and for all who dwell on earth. We know that every soul deserves peace. We know that every soul deserves celebration. May we be your vessels to bring that time about quickly and in our day. And let us say, amen.
Okay, it's Rabbi Spiro from Hill Havaron, Washington, D.C. Her most recent of the 3 times, March 11th, 2022. I'm good. I can assure you, Danny, I'm looking at the clock here, and I want to leave lots of time, so I might speed through some more slides here. But I do want to talk military rabbis. A great segment of this history. Military rabbis who have prayed in Congress, who have worn their uniforms. Here are 4 of them right here. On the right is in the House is Colonel Leenwand from the Army. On the bottom right, praying in the Senate, is Rabbi Howard Robinson of the Navy. On the left, Chaplain Kaprow of the Navy, and Stephen Ryan of the Arlington Cemetery. He is, when there are Jewish members of the Air Force who are buried in Arlington Cemetery, Rabbi Ryan of Gudas Achim in the Washington area in Alexandria does the prayer for burying the dead there. I'll just really fast. 55 rabbis who have been guest chaplain in Congress also served as a U.S. military chaplain. The first was Leonard Levy in the Senate in 1895. He later was an Army chaplain in the Spanish-American War. There are chaplains who have prayed in Congress who also are in the National Guard and have served. And here's a couple of them. The top right there, by the way, is a Rabbi Mark Getman of Temple Emmanuel in Canarsie, who's in the National Guard. If you watch The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel and you see scenes of a rabbi in there, that rabbi is played by Rabbi Mark Getman. So he is the first rabbi who's been on both C-SPAN and Amazon Prime. So in that role, so that's a lot of fun. Holocaust survivors, a big part of the story. I love talking about this. There are rabbis who survived the Holocaust, came to America, became rabbis, and then ended up praying in Congress. And that's just such a great victory, a small victory, but victory nonetheless. Rabbi Laszlo Berkowitz, my rabbi, he recently passed away. I belong to Temple Road of Shalom in Northern Virginia. He is the survivor of Auschwitz. The 82nd Airborne rescued him. He gave his prayer in Congress there June 14th, 1988, on Flag Day. And you see on the left, a rabbi, another survivor who mentioned Auschwitz in his prayer, Rabbi Isaac Newman, prayed in Congress twice. So these are Holocaust survivors, became rabbis and ended up praying in Congress. Quick chart looking at immigration, where many of the rabbis are born in different countries, Poland, Germany, Austria, and Russia being among the top countries. Quick thing on rules. Thank you to Rabbi Resnikoff for providing. These are rules that guest chaplains, not just rabbis, are provided. The length of the prayer should not exceed 150 words. No political viewpoints. You are there to pray. You're not there to lobby or advocate legislation. You don't make any introductory remarks. You just begin the prayer. So those are some of the rules, and you have to submit it at least 1 week ahead of time for incorporation in the congressional record. Rabbis and their prayers, that would go into more of the content where they've talked about wide range of war and peace, the environment, space, American institutions, Congress, and government. You heard Rabbi Fellman invoke the first president as an example. And that's why I was so happy to hear him say that, because George Washington, has been mentioned 9 times by a rabbi praying in Congress. Lincoln, the most number, 10 times by rabbis praying in Congress. Rabbi Resnikoff in his prayer, you just heard him mention Franklin Roosevelt. That was the first time a rabbi mentioned FDR in his prayer. So here's a list of mentions of presidents by rabbis by name or by implication in their prayers. Prophets also are mentioned. Isaiah has been mentioned in 71 rabbi prayers. 1 out of every 10 mentions Isaiah. The most frequently passage, Isaiah 2:4, 46 times. The famous nation shall not lift up sword against nation or learn war anymore. War in the Senate. I'll flip through this real fast. Senate rules. 1978, a rabbi, Jeffrey Stiffman, provided this to me of the rules, the letter he got concerning his appearance in the Senate. And I'm sorry, I out of place. Another chart of Army there. Sometimes through my research, it was a great discovery to see Hebrew in the congressional record in prayers, and in the congressional record, here are some examples from the early 60s of of Hebrew being incorporated in the official record, the congressional record for the rabbi prayers. Mentioned Jewish figures because of the number of Lubavitch rabbis. The Lubavitch Rebbe Menachem Schneerson is the most frequently mentioned Jewish leader, a Jewish figure in rabbi prayers. Moses 15 times, and there's Moses right there, and looking right straight across from the house chamber from the rostrum. 23 depictions of lawgivers. Moses is right in the middle as the you're looking out if you're giving a prayer in Congress. I'll do this video really fast. Forgive me here. An example of a rabbi prayer making national news, and this will explain itself. This is the end of 2019.
2019 winds down. A prayer this morning on Capitol Hill from a rabbi marking the end of the year with a message of hope.
With this decade's last house prayer, we give thanks for progress, look ahead with hope, but with eyes wide open to prejudice, hatred, terror that remain, fueling violence like the anti-Semitic Hanukkah party attack Saturday, the Texas church attack Sunday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. And let us say, Amen.
All right. That was, by the way, that was the first time, as I fast forward here, that was the first time anti-Semitism has been mentioned in a rabbi's prayer, domestic anti-Semitism by Rabbi Reznikov. I'm going to skip this one for length. I'm going to skip here. I'm going through because I'm keeping an eye on the clock here and I'm running over already. I do want to mention sponsors of rabbis. Here's the breakdown. Democrats have sponsored rabbis 202 times. Republicans in Congress have sponsored rabbis 119 times. One independent, Joe Lieberman, sponsored Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs once. On the left, by the way, leader Jeffries, the new Democratic leader, sponsored Rabbi Shlomo Siegel of Kehilat Moshe, an Orthodox rabbi in Brooklyn. And in the middle, Republican Senator Lisa Murkowski sponsored Lubavitch Rabbi Yosef Greenberg is in Alaska, just an example of that. I can skip that fast. Both, okay. I do want to get into, actually, I'll do this really fast. Rabbis pray in Congress. Rabbis also pray in inaugurations, presidents and governors. The first rabbi to pray to inaugurate presidential inauguration, Rabbi Samuel Thurman of Missouri, prayed for Harry Truman in 1949 in his inauguration. And they pray in governor inaugurations. Even though it's a little bit off topic here, this year, here's a great fun fact: 4 women rabbis prayed for 4 women governors.
Howard, this is actually really important because one of those rabbis grew up at Temple Sinai in Pittsburgh.
No kidding. Tell me, who?
Rabbi Alicia Harris, who's in suburban Detroit, prayed at Governor Whitmer's installation or inauguration in Michigan, and Alicia grew up at Temple Sinai. She's one of our.
On the bottom left.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let me make a note of that. I'll do some more research. Thank you for telling me that. I'm making a quick note here to dig in on that later on. That's beautiful. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for that. I just had a little fun here. I asked Chat GPT to write a prayer a rabbi delivered in Congress, and I asked it twice, and they came up with 2 fairly decent prayers from rabbis. I don't want to put Rabbi Fellman or Rabbi Reznikov out of business, so I'll just go over that one really fast. And all right, now my last video. Then I'm going to stop sharing screen. I'm going to throw it back to Danny, Rabbi Fellman. But this will speak for itself, and I'll just let this play here. This will be my last video.
In order, today's opening prayer
Be a guest of Senator Mark Warner. Will be offered by our guest chaplain, Rabbi Israel Zilberman, founding rabbi, Congregation Beth Shabram in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
The prayer will be offered by a guest chaplain, the Rabbi Wayne Dossett of the Elijah Menyon, La Costa, California.
The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, the Rabbi Richard Baruch Rabinowitz, Aish International, New York, New York. The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, the Rabbi Thomas A. Lockheim, Congregation Or Kadash, Tucson, Arizona.
Will be offered by the guest chaplain, Reverend Erwin N. Goldenberg, Temple Beth Israel, York, Pennsylvania.
A prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Rabbi Stephen Roth, a Congregation Eitz Kahim, Passaic, New Jersey. Prayer will be offered today by our guest chaplain, Rabbi Michael Siegel, Anshe Emet Synagogue, Chicago, Illinois.
And I count it a high honor to present to you His Excellency Shem Herzog, President of Israel.
Today's prayer will be offered by guest chaplain, Rabbi Shem Shon Sherrill, Congregation Keho Zeke Ron Mordecai, Brooklyn, New York.
Rabbi Baraz, Rabbi Yitzi of the Talmudic University Yeshiva in Miami Beach, Rabbi Yossi Harlig of the Shabbat Center of Kendall and Pinecrest.
The Wednesday, Thursday, Friday situation, as we all know, because of Rosh, help me, Carl. Rosh Hashanah. We Methodists have problems with that. At any rate,
Today's prayer will be offered by guest chaplain, Rabbi Mel Heck, Temple Beth Ann, Las Vegas, Nevada, a guest of Senator Harry Reid.
As Rabbi Harlig mentioned in his invocation, today is significant. It's significant because it's the day of the Shabbat community, important the day in the Shabbat community. It's the 15th anniversary of the passing of Lubavitcher Rabbi Shanarison, one of the great Jewish leaders of our time.
Prayer will be offered by guest chaplain, Rabbi Moshe Feller, Lubavitch House, St. Paul, Minnesota.
Rabbi Feller has been a leader in the Twin Cities Jewish community for over 30 years. Accompanying the rabbi today were 20 students from the Habab Academy located in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Today's opening prayer will be offered by Rabbi Mendy Greenberg, director of the Matsu Jewish Center, Shabbat Lavovich in Palmer, Alaska.
And completed postgraduate Judaic studies at the Lubavitch Yeshiva in Brooklyn, New York. Since 1988, Rabbi Green has served as the Lubavitcher Rebbe emissary to Rochester.
Madam Speaker, I want to talk about Rabbi Hyman, who just gave the opening prayer. There is a midrash, one of the many parables that embellish upon the Torah. In this particular midrash, there is a man from the land of Israel, a businessman who was in another country.
Under Rabbi Siegel's leadership, the synagogue has grown and truly fulfilled its commitment to Kalal Yisrael and Tikkun Olam. I am grateful for my punctuation and pronunciation keys, and I'm grateful for my constituents that they can be part of such an inspiring Kehillah. Please join me in thanking Rabbi Siegel for leading us in prayer today.
I would say that in addition to his spiritual guidance, he introduced me to Cholent, which for this Presbyterian was a new experience. I think I thank him for introducing me to that part of his history and culture, if not exactly for the culinary experience. Welcome, Rabbi Wiederhorn, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
All right, and I yield back to you, Danny and Rabbi Fellman. I'm going to stop screen sharing now, and I will throw it back for the midrash from Rabbi Fellman here. So.
Nothing quite like hearing Strom Thurmond trying to struggle through Hebrew.
That's right. That's right. We don't make it easy on them sometimes, but exactly right.
There are a few times he might deserve that, but that's a whole different conversation. A couple of things that I just wanted to note briefly, and I don't know, Howard, in your research, if these things have popped up, there are times when rabbis get very close to talking about an issue. And so you can dance right up to the line, and depending on who's listening, you might come right up to the line or you might go yonder past it. How do you determine that, and what happens? Is there a repercussion that comes from that? I'm not aware of any. I was very careful in mine to not get anywhere close to that line. But in listening to a bunch of these, I could hear them doing this. And I don't know, Rabbi Resnikoff, if you had that experience or how that played out for you.
I'm going to let Rabbi I will answer. Let me, as Rabbi Resnikoff unmutes, and I'm going to call on him to answer. Let me just say, just for research purposes, I love what you said about dancing to the line, because if it were, I don't want to compare, but I will, because when the Lubavitch rabbis pray, it's very, I don't want to say cookie cutter, but it's very, they talk about the Noahide laws, and they talk about, it's very repetitive is unfair, but I like prayers just from research purposes that get into the meaty areas. And you're right about dancing. These prayers reflect the times that they are in. In the book, we talk about prayers around the Vietnam era and prayers of civil rights and themes and so on. But Rabbi Resnikoff, can you answer Rabbi Fellman's question more directly than I can?
Yes, I'm having trouble with my camera, but I hope people can hear me. It's wonderful to see you, Rabbi Fellman, and of course you, Howard. As Rabbi Fellman knows, there's a Talmudic principle, hamevin yavin, the one who understands will understand. So I often get around it by saying something that sympathetic listeners will understand. Also, there's only one time when I didn't have to get, or I was able to change my prayer without submitting it in advance. As Howard explained, you have to normally submit it 7 days ahead, and that's a way that the chaplain's offices can make sure you're not crossing any lines. But when I gave one of the prayers that you showed, and I mentioned anti-Semitism in America I didn't realize it was the first time a rabbi's prayer would do that. That Shabbos was the Hanukkah attack, and then that Sunday was a church attack, and my prayer was on a Monday. I just didn't know how I could get up and give a prayer that ignored those two attacks. So I asked the chaplain's assistant in the house if she would trust me, and I could rewrite my prayer and just hand it to her when I ascended to the podium, and she agreed. Also, I don't know if you emphasized, Howard, but just I did one thing. You showed some of the old rabbis' prayers that included Hebrew. The modern rules, both in the House and the Senate, include a rule, no foreign languages. So that's where you won't see in my prayer or Rabbi Fellman's prayer or any modern prayer the use of Hebrew. And the hardest thing for me is the rule that you have to just get up and give the prayer, because I'm so used to getting up, telling a story, and then leading from the story into the prayer. So thanks.
It's also hard. I mean, 150 words is not a lot of time. Ask a rabbi to talk for 10 minutes. It's no big deal. We can all do it. Ask us to talk for 1 minute. That's hard. And so I remember working on my prayer, and it took real time and effort to whittle it down and to get it into that time frame. And I'm positive I'm not the only rabbi who had that experience. Rabbi Resnikoff talked about hamevin yavin, those who understand will understand. I quoted President Washington in mine, but it was from a very specific source. And so if you knew the history, you would pick up on it immediately. I'm willing to bet Howard picked up on it. I'm not sure how many others did. There's this wonderful exchange between George Washington and the Jewish community, the congregation in Newport, Rhode Island. And so what I did was pulled the phrasing from that letter that Washington wrote to Newport and spun that phrasing a little bit. I don't have it in front of me, but if you knew that letter, you'd pick up on it immediately, but you'd have to be somebody like Howard to know that letter. So I think rabbis have done that through the years. I can't be the only one who has played that game.
Yeah, I will say it actually, that letter has been cited several times by different rabbis over the years, and you're right, and I'm glad that you did. Rabbi Fellman, I'm going to ask you a question because I actually see a reference to this question on a different topic in the chat, at least a direct message to me. How did you get the gig? How did you get there?
In a sort of indirect way. So at the time I was the assistant rabbi or the associate rabbi, I forget what my title was, in New Brunswick, New Jersey. I was the number 2 rabbi in a synagogue that had 3 rabbis. The senator from Nebraska, one of the senators from Nebraska at the time, was a man named Ben Nelson. And Ben is an old family friend. Ben and my father have a friendship going back 50, 60 years. Ben was a neighbor. He lived around the corner from us. And was elected governor of Nebraska in 1990. And I was very involved in his campaign, and then was elected to the Senate in 2000. And unbeknownst to me, my father said to him, "Do you still allow guest chaplains in the Senate?" And Ben said to my father, "Absolutely. Is Dan interested?" And my dad, without asking me, said, "Absolutely." And so I'm chugging along in my normal life, and one day get this phone call from Senator Nelson's office saying, "We've arranged for you to be the guest chaplain on January, whatever date it was, 2009. Does that work for you?" And I said, "Well, let me check my calendar." "Sure, of course it works." And then hung up and called my dad and said, "What the hell did you get me into?" And my father said, "Oh, didn't I tell you about that?" And I said, "No, you definitely didn't tell me about that. My wife is 8 months pregnant. What are you doing?" And sure enough, Melissa was with me that day. Zach was about 1.5 years old, and Melissa was 8 months pregnant with Jacob. And so it was a little bit of an interesting time to be traveling with a very pregnant wife, but we did it and she was there. And it was an extraordinary experience. We were with the chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, who is the Senate chaplain, in his office first. And then one of the things that Howard didn't play, thankfully, is the sponsoring representative or senator can stand up and speak about the guest chaplain. And so Senator Nelson stood up and spoke about me, and it made it into the congressional record. And he talked about a nickname that he himself has for me. He's the only one, actually he and one of his aides were the only ones who I would ever answer to this nickname. And the aide has since passed away. So it's really just Senator Nelson, who, if he calls me that name, I'll answer, but nobody else can get away with it. And people have tried. Howard, I don't know if you have that clip of tape. I hope you don't, but.
Well, it's funny you say this, because I think I gave a presentation in Omaha, the Omaha synagogue, in Temple Beth Abraham, I think, and
Bethel.
Bethel, and under Rabbi Abraham there, and I think you were on there, and I think I played that, and you yelled at me, and you threw a fit, you threw a chair, and I realized I should not do it this time. So yeah, I know what you're talking about. I'm not going to play it. I can assure you, I can't do rabbinical anger a second time one of these. So
it was no anger. Come on.
Somebody needs to tell us the nickname.
So the short story was, I was in a car accident coming out of the JCC in Omaha when I was 16 or 17. It was a dumb thing where I was an inexperienced driver and I hit another car. New things happen. Thankfully, nobody was injured excessively, and it was not, as those things go, it was not a big deal. But the person I hit was a friend of this aide of the governor. And so the person I hit told his friend about it. And the next time I was in the office volunteering, the aide of the governor was there, and the governor himself was there. And the aide looked at me and said, "Hey, Crash, how are you?" And so, I relived the whole thing. And Senator Nelson picked up on the name Crash and has always called me Crash. I think he knows my name is Daniel. He has never called me Daniel. I mean, Ben knows me as Crash. And when he runs into my father now, he'll say to my father, not "How's Rabbi Fellman," not "How's Dan," but "How's Crash?" But Ben is the only one I will respond to if somebody says, "Hey, Crash." People have tried and I won't do it. But so that's how I got the nickname.
Rabbi Fellman, I'm going to ask you a question I get a lot, and I'm going to ask Rabbi Resnikoff if he wants to join in. Another very practical question. When you were there and you gave the prayer in the Senate, was the room full or was the room empty? And what did it feel like to give a prayer in either full or empty room?
It was mostly empty when I was there. There were a handful of senators. Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio was the presiding officer, so he was up on the podium. He was the one who actually introduced me. Senator Nelson was there. Senator Roland Burris, who was the appointed senator who followed President Obama when Obama left the Senate to become the president. And Burris was the one who got Rod Blagojevich into all the trouble. And Burris was a brand new senator, was in his first couple of days and was there that day. And there was one on the Republican side, and I'm blanking on who it was. That was it. The chamber was otherwise empty. My parents flew in from Omaha. They were up in the gallery with Melissa. We did not have Zach up in the gallery. Zach was a year and a half old and was watched by one of Nelson's aides in his office. I think they didn't allow young children at that point in the galleries. I don't know if they do now or not. It was a generally empty room, which was a little strange, but only a little strange. And it didn't take away from the majesty of the whole thing. One of the interesting sidebars to all of this was that they allowed me to have floor privileges for the day, which meant that after I gave the opening prayer, I had a seat on the dais, and so I could watch the business of the day. And I did. I spent a good chunk of the morning hours sitting on the floor. And they passed an important bill that day. It was called S-CHIP. It was the Children's Health Insurance Program that was a precursor to Obamacare. And so I sat and watched the debate and the final vote on it from the dais. And it was a fascinating thing to see the senators coming in and moving around. At that time, the chair closest to the senator who had the desk closest to the doorway going to the Republican caucus room, and I'm blanking, it's not called caucus room, it's called something else. That senator was required to keep a desk drawer filled with candy so that any senator could walk in, open the drawer, and his or her favorite candy was available for them. And I watched over the course of the day as senators walked in, opened the door, took out whatever candy was their favorite, and made their way to their desk. And I remember watching one senator being peeved that his kind of candy wasn't there. They'd run out or something. And it was usually a very junior senator who was instructed, you better go have this candy stocked. So funny little things like that popped up along the way.
That's great. I'm going to ask, and I love the personal, I've heard staying on the floor is like just a great benefit of this. Rabbi Reznikov, of your 19 prayers, have you ever had a packed house for any of them?
Yes, I've had both, hardly anybody there and completely packed. What impresses me is when it's packed, how especially the senators bow their heads and really thoughtful and prayerful as they listen, and then they say amen. It's a wonderful question because you can't always see this on television, but a lot of the senators or representatives will watch the session from their monitors on the desk and then just come in for a vote. I was lucky enough that there were some very important votes a few of the times, especially in the Senate, and all these senators came in, and then as Rabbi Fellman said, you could remain afterwards, and so many of them came up and shook my hand, and it was such an honor to me to actually have contact with these people. And I'll give a shout out to C-SPAN, since Howard is the director of communications for C-SPAN, that even if there's no one in the chamber, or hardly anyone in the chamber, it's still a prayer that's heard by so many people because it goes out over C-SPAN. So I always am very cognizant of that fact. Even when I'm looking at a pretty empty room, I realize I'm talking to, maybe hundreds of thousands of people around the country.
Thank you. Rabbi Fellman and Danny, I'm going to throw it. I know we're running low on time. If there are questions from the audience or anybody else, I will pass it off to you for directing.
Sure, Anita, kick us off, please.
Okay, I wondered, I was very taken by the first two we heard, the woman chaplain and Rabbi Reznikov's one from 8/9/22. Is there a way we can get the text?
Sure. Yes. How about the really easy way to do this? I have posted every rabbi prayer on YouTube. So all the YouTubes that you've seen here, I have a YouTube channel, and I can get to Danny afterwards distributing all this stuff. But every rabbi for whom there is video, I have put on YouTube, and in the YouTube itself in the description, I have put the congressional record text in there. That's like the simplest way. But in general, yes, everything that happens in the floor, in the chambers of the House and the Senate is in the congressional record. So a different way of going about this, you can Google congressional record for August 2022 and find Rabbi Reznikov's prayer in there. So a couple of different ways, but I can get with Danny afterwards. Danny, if you want to share with everybody, I can send a couple of links on finding these and other prayers as well. And by the way, I've put on YouTube the rabbi prayers as well as this when they are sponsoring remarks by the member of Congress or senator, what he or she said as well, and a transcript. So yes, I can. We can get that. I can get that to you afterwards to Danny. Thank you for asking that. By the way, I appreciate that. I will say this, that again, I go back. This is my book, but it's not my story. And some of the prayers in there are so great from rabbis. I just had time to show 2 or 3, but very moving. Very, as we said earlier, reflective of the times, and it's a pleasant journey through American Jewish history to go through and see a sample of these prayers from everybody. So I'll share those links with everybody.
Rabbi J. Leonard Levy, who you said was a veteran, I think, of the Spanish-American War, was rabbi at Rhoda Sholem in Pittsburgh.
Thank you. Yes, I remember seeing that. I think I mentioned that in the book. So yeah, I forgot that's a very important Pittsburgh connection. It's funny. I appreciate you saying that. When he gave his prayer, he was not. What I did to designate the affiliation is how they are identified in the congressional record, the official record for that. He is not identified with Pittsburgh in his prayer, but you're totally right in the research. Yes, he a long history of an involvement with prayer with that. So yes, thank you very much for that. That's an important asterisk to the story. Thank you. Yeah.
You find that there's a chronological concentration of rabbis who've given prayers, like was it more concentrated in the civil rights era, or maybe more recently after the Pittsburgh synagogue shootings several years ago?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I've not been asked that, and I'm going to spend 30 seconds talking about, for some reason, during the Vietnam War era, there was I think, like, I did the math, I think it was like 10% of all the rabbi prayers in Congress occurred between 65 and 75, or whatever, 63 and 75. It's very, just a lot of rabbi prayers concentrated in that time. And the prayer language themselves, the language of the prayers themselves reflected American societies. So by that, I mean, some of the earlier prayers of that era, 63, 64, 65, the rabbinical prayers in Congress were very pro, again, we talked about how, using Rabbi Fellman's great phrase of dancing around, but they did talk about how we need to pray for our troops who are fighting. And actually there was language like fighting the godless communists. Even rabbis said that at the time in the early days of the Vietnam War. As public opinion swayed, and as the reality of the war was hitting everybody, then you started getting rabbi prayers saying, as we bring our troops home, we need to address issues, domestic issues, and funding for poverty programs and so on. So you actually do see the sweep of the American history in those, but Vietnam definitely comes across. After 9/11, there were several rabbi prayers and mentioned the war on terror prominently. And it's funny, I really was expecting, you mentioned the Pittsburgh the shootings. There actually wasn't any special recognition of that. I was expecting a rabbi prayer from Pittsburgh, but there wasn't any in the aftermath for whatever reason. But yes, so you do see concentration of some areas. But thank you for asking that. Yes.
It looks like Saul and Sydney both have their hands up. I don't know who's first. So Saul, you went alphabetically. Go ahead. Saul, you're muted.
I said excellent because that's one of the few times in my life that will actually ever happen. So I was just curious, when they put the rule in about no foreign languages more recently, but were some of those rules that you noted earlier on, when were those implemented? So were rabbis or any chaplain or any clergy who's giving the opening remarks, did they not bother to, as Dan noted earlier, dance around those issues, particularly in areas of contention?
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. I'm going to take rabbis out of the answer for a second here. Overall, prayers have become political. There was a time we mentioned Barry Black, the chaplain, the Senate chaplain now. About 10 years ago, 12 years ago, he gave very pointed prayers about the fiscal cliff, about heading toward debt, and how Congress has to address these issues. And it actually got written up in the New York Times for the series of prayers. About 4 or 5 years ago, Father Conroy, Patrick Conroy, Catholic, then the House chaplain, gave a prayer. This, believe it or not, now in political history is not the only time Democrats and Republicans have gone after each other. It happened, it was 4 years ago as well. And Father Conroy, and I vividly remember this, he raised his hands in his prayer. And again, he's the official chaplain, raised his prayer and did what's essentially an exorcism. And he said, "Begone evil spirits from the house." And I think Rabbi Resnick, I remember this. So that's an unmistakable dancing and then crossing the line of what you see in these things. So,
and it didn't work.
Well, you know what? I was going to pose that to Rabbi Fellman, who talked about civility in his prayer. Did you think that your message took hold? Is there civility now and is problem solved there? I've had that question. Do these prayers actually matter at all? And it's a great question. And I think they do matter. They definitely do matter because, you know, it shows America, it's America, you know, there's prayers, but, you know, and the diversity of religion, but to the message, the world language themselves are, in other words, are the members of Congress listening when there is messages of civility? I might lean on the rabbis here to see if they want to take a shot at that one.
I can tell you this, Senator Nelson had a long history of civility and of working across the aisle. And Senator Brown of Ohio has a pretty good record there as well. So 2 out of the 3 that I can remember for sure did. Senator Burris's term was pretty short-lived. And I'm still blanking on who the Republican senator was. I don't know. I mean, you know, ask me if I can tell what message resonates on Rosh Hashanah, or as they called it, Rosh Hashanah, or whatever the pronunciation was. It's hard to say for sure, but it doesn't mean that I'm not going to stop trying, and that I'm not going to do everything I can to help people raise themselves up to where their highest level can be. And so there was a high-mindedness in my own head of what can I do to elevate and get us out of the gutter? And if I speak in a high-minded language, will that rub off? And I remember being conscious of that as I was composing the prayer. God only knows if it works.
Yeah.
But it was certainly in my mind as I was doing it.
Great, thank you, Rabbi. And I'm going to get to Sidney Booth of my old stomping grounds at Temple Micah.
Thank you. Thank you for the privilege. Howard, what caused you to write this book?
You know, it's funny. I since Sid Booth knows my family growing up in Temple Micah, my current family, you know, it's so here's the deal. We mentioned I work at C-SPAN, so I watch Congress for a living, and for better or for worse. And so this as an intellectual exercise, I was just always curious about Congress praying. It wasn't they shouldn't or they should. It's terrible they do this or it's great. I was just like, this is interesting. It looks like nothing else that happens during the day. There's no fighting. You know, it's just a prayer to God. And I just, so it just occurred to me why. And I just start keying in on. That becomes my favorite part of every congressional session is the prayer. Now, every so often, there's a rabbi who fills in as the guest chaplain, and being Jewish, raised the Temple Micah, thanks to Sid Booth and others. I just, I was just even more curious. Well, why are rabbis there, and what are they saying, and how many are there, and how often, and who are they, and all that. And I just started digging in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. and just try to track down every rabbi who was prayed in Congress, and who they are and what they said. And I came up with a Google spreadsheet on Google Sheets of every rabbi, who sponsored them, when they give their prayer, Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, what they said, and made a spreadsheet out of this and wrote a book out of it. It wasn't that quick, but that's why I was joking about my family. I never really told them, because I really should be upstairs fixing the refrigerator. Instead, I'm counting rabbis who are praying in Congress. So it's kind of the propeller hat kind of thing. I'll tell you this. I totally love doing this story. This is my first and only book. I'm not a professional author. I'm an amateur at all this. It just struck me that this is a part of the Jewish American experience that needs to be told, of American Jewish history, the stories of rabbis who are praying in Congress, because you can say, and I hear it all the time, and it's legitimate to say, I don't like people praying in Congress, in this church state, but that is not this. I don't get into that. I get into, if you want to dismiss that, fine, but don't dismiss the history of the rich Jewish history of the rabbis who have been there, and who they are and what they've said, and telling the story. And this is a sliver of Jewish history that's never been explored. And with it happening over 600 times, I think it definitely is worth exploring there. So I put all my information together, wrote a book. This may not shock you, but there's no market for a book about rabbis praying in Congress. But I found, after 100 cold pitches and cold letters, I found Academic Studies Press, and they said, we get it, we understand what you're doing. They specialize in Jewish history books, and they published it for me. And it's been, I love doing this. I love presenting to your synagogue and others, and not as like an author talking about his or her latest book, but just being able to talk about and show video of rabbis in Congress. Particularly, and I would a little saccharine here, particularly this, as rabbis say, troubled times, in American Jewish history that we're experiencing right now, to show something happy and to show something participatory of Jews in the American political experience. I think it's, in a way, almost cathartic. It is therapeutic to be able to talk about a happy part of the Jewish experience. So,
yes. Howard, your contribution actually, I think, is particularly significant in these times. I mean, we're living in times with anti-Semitic incidents going up, and Jews are wondering, are they safe in this country, and really wrestling with that. And your book shows just how intertwined Jews have been with our government and our country. So don't belittle your contribution here. This is a fascinating read. I encourage you to go buy the book. I donated one of my copies of the book to the Temple Library, so the Temple has one. I kept a couple of copies myself because I just kind of liked it, but Howard's contribution is actually really quite important. And it's important for American Jews to see that even in the midst of some really troubling developments in our country, we Jews have played a pretty significant role at a high level. And Howard shows that. And so, kol hakavod to you, all the honor to you. You don't cut yourself short in all of this.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Howard, this is Arnie Reznikov. Could I add just one comment? It dovetails on what Rabbi Fellman said, but I think you implied this as you went through, but it's important to note that every single official House chaplain, official Senate chaplain has been Christian. All the Senate chaplains, if I'm not mistaken, have been Protestant. 2 of the House chaplains were Catholic, all the rest Protestant. But the House chaplain now is the first woman official chaplain of either chamber, and the Senate chaplain now is the first African-American chaplain of either chamber. So that leads to the question, can we have a rabbi as the official House chaplain or Senate chaplain? My prediction is yes, and I know for a fact that once a rabbi was on the short list the last 5 names before the chaplain was chosen. So our time will come to break that barrier as well.
I agree with Rabbi Reznikoff. And to be completely blunt, if my name was the one that went forward, I'd say yes. I have no desire to leave at all. But if that one was offered, I'd say yes.
Excellent.
And I suspect Rabbi Reznikoff would too, but that's a whole different conversation.
Danny, you have your hand raised. I'll throw it back to you. And I know we're short on time here. So
I'll ask this one quick and we'll see what kind of time we look at. If everybody's mind sticking around for more questions, I'm sure excited. So as you've talked about kind of that, like this was, kind of your pet project and something you were looking into and like the amazing amount of work that went into this. How did you find the time to do all of this research? And as you kind of tracked, like the number of women rabbis that were kippot and the number of rabbis from X, Y, or Z states, or how many rabbis quoted from X, Y, or Z, how did you organize all this information? And was there stuff that had to be kind of sacrificed for a page count that you wish you could have included?
that's, let me tell you this. I appreciate it. Even if this is the last question, I love this. The process question is great. Here's the deal. When I started this, the congressional, there are two big elements that I used for my research: the congressional record and the C-SPAN video. And now there are limitations on both. The congressional record, at the time I began, was not digitized going backwards. It began digitizing in 1995. I found anecdotally congressional record going backward in time. There were services you can buy into where you go through and you search. Now, fortunately, as I was writing it, they started digitizing further back. This is important because here's the deal. As I go back further in time, rabbis are not identified as rabbis. Sometimes they are identified as reverends, like in the 1940s and earlier. So at that point, when you're going to think I'm crazy for this, I actually literally read through every single prayer ever given in Congress that's in the congressional record to try to find out who the rabbis were. And so if I came across a name in the early days that sounded vaguely Jewish, then I would start Googling and all that. And I came across, like, for instance, some of these military chaplains, Leonard Levy, we talked about from 1898, I think it's just by his military title. But he's not identified as a rabbi, but it's an identifiable Jewish name. So I just went through and researched that. Now what tripped me up sometimes was there were Christian chaplains who had very Jewish sounding and looking names. I remember coming across like an Israel Benjamin, who gave a lot of prayers in the 1890s. I think that was his name, and wasn't Jewish. So a lot of us, tripping over that. So I just, going through every prayer, just trying to figure out who the Jews are. Now, I would imagine, I gave a count, I think is a pretty good count. I would suspect that I've missed one or two along the way. I hope there are further researchers who double check my work and find more. Great. Now, you may ask the great question about wearing the yarmulkes. That's where the video comes in. The C-SPAN video of these prayers, I'm able to, it's wonderful. It's one thing to see the written prayer. It's another thing that's more important to see how the rabbi, he or she, delivers the prayer, and to see in person the mannerisms. And that's where you can see the yarmulkes, or if they're military rabbis, that they wore their colors. You can't see that for the congressional record, that they wore the uniform. I have a rabbi, rabbi who raised his hand doing the priestly benediction over the Senate one day, and it's amazing video. Rabbi Maurice Lyons of St. Louis raised his hand, and you can't see the congressional record. So so that's where the video comes to play. The C-SPAN video, though, we only started in 1979, and our digitized video only began in 1987. So the first prayer that I actually have on video is Rabbi Joshua Haberman, the Washington Hebrew congregation, in 1985. And it's actually really cool. He's introduced by Tip O'Neill. For you political junkies, remember the avuncular Speaker of the House from Massachusetts. And it's great to sing, in his Boston accent, here's Rabbi Haberman, and it's a big, larger than life. So the video is amazing. But those are my two big vehicles, was the congressional record and the C-SPAN video. Now, along the way, I'm a novice I'm not, I'm no means, I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Maryland. So I in political science, that's as worthless as you can get. I have no advanced degree in Judaism, Jewish history. I flunked out of religious school, so I have no qualifications to be writing a book of a Jewish book, but I've learned personal story here, personal journey. I learned a heck of a lot of Jewish history and of Jewish prayers and Jewish tradition that I didn't know beforehand, that I love knowing. Rabbi Reznikov was a big help along the way in teaching me ways of looking at of the history of some prayers and so on. Just meeting him has been a treasure. So for me personally, Rabbi Fellman, thank you for your words there. I hope this contributes to a greater understanding of Jews and the political process, of a sliver of history no one knew about. Danny, you called it, a pet project, a passion project. Just, it's neat to be able to seize on something that no one's ever done before and write about this. And again, I'll point out, no one's even written about the history of prayers at all in Congress. There are lots of arguments about whether they should pray, but no one's really taken the time. And, I came across some really interesting non-Jewish history too of, Billy Graham giving prayers in Congress and Jimmy Swaggart giving prayers in Congress, and, just that history as well. So it's neat stuff. I'm looking at the time, Danny, so I'll throw it back to you for time considerations.
And I will yield my time to Rabbi Fellman.
Anybody else have any other questions or comments? Well, Howard, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you for writing this book. I think it's a wonderful addition to the Jewish library. And I particularly like one specific page in the book, but that's neither here nor there.
I want you to assure the audience that you get another time in the prayer in Congress, another gig. I want you up there so I can add to the rich history here. So I want you to get working on that. Find yourself a congressman to get you up there.
I will start working on. We have a newly elected representative here in Pittsburgh. I'll start working on it. But it was a wonderful experience to do, and if I were to get that honor again, it would be lovely. Thank you. On page 124, Danny's.
Danny's quick.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. This was
Thank you.
incredible. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You guys are great. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.